Thank you very much for your hospitality. It's wonderful to be here. It's always nice at this time to be away from the office. I'm sure you all know that. So thank you very much for having me. I'm going to be doing a little Syrian cultural profile. Please understand that it's a very short Syrian profile, because I could go on and on and on and on. But it's very short. There's a shuttle we need to take at 3:50. So please bear with me. The agenda, as is up there, is a bit large, but I'm going to be doing it quite briefly. There'll be an introduction to Syria. There'll be an overview of the Syrian crisis as it's happening right now. There's going to be understanding the social outlooks of the Syrians, and then the challenges of the Syrian refugees since 2011. I think this is better. Can everyone hear this? Because I can't read from up there. The timeline, Syrian timeline. So from 1500s to 1900s was the Ottoman Empire, so everyone there spoke Farsi. 1918 to 46 was the French colonial period, and that's why those of you who are working in the sector are going to be finding some of the Syrians speaking French. So keep that in mind, please, when you're preparing for your settlement services. 47 to 63, there were multiple coups and the creation of the United Arab Republic between Syria, Egypt, and I think there was another country that I can't remember at the moment. I will apologize. From 63 till the present, the Syrians are governed under the Ba'ath Party, which also governed a lot, which came out of Iraq. And then from 1971 to 2000, it was Hafiz al-Assad who was a president, and then his son took over when Hafiz al-Assad passed away in 2000. In 1970, Hafiz al-Assad seized power. He was working as a general, but he seized power and made himself president. He created a legislative body. He introduced a new constitution, and he rigged elections to make himself president. And from that time up until the present, Syrian government has very close connections to the USSR, well, Russia and Iran. Syria's consumer needs were met through the development of various products. Within the Arab world, the Syrians are known to have the best cloth. So if you wanted some tablecloth, or if you would like to come visit me, beautiful tablecloth, beautiful underwear. Most of the Arab countries will travel to Syria to get, sorry, videotape. Beautiful underwear, beautiful tablecloth, towels, and the works. We all used to travel to go get them from there. And then they'd also have plastics, paper, cloth, and plastics, beautiful. The government under the Assads provided free healthcare, provided free education for all. Okay. But then everything was Arabicized. All education was Arabicized. So many of the Syrians that you're going to be seeing within the settlement sector would have had their education, their higher education in Arabic. And so that might be a challenge. My programs manager at the Arabs Community Center studied in Syria. She's a medically trained doctor. That doesn't sound right. She's an internationally trained doctor, but it's all in Arabic. So she had quite a bit of problems when she came over to Canada trying to become certified to be a medical doctor. But Syria also is one of the very few Arab countries where there's a high rate of literacy, both women and men in general within the Arab world. It's a beautiful country. I visited many years ago. It's one of the most beautiful countries I've seen. Bashar al-Assad. So he started off being very well and very much liked, even though there's a lot of dissent within the Syrian community at that time, because They had to change the constitution and make him president after his father. But he started off as being very well liked. He gave many of the groups working within Syria some sort of freedom, of the press, the trade. He benefited of growing urban business elite. He is an Alawite? No, Alawi. He is an Alawi. That's in Arabic. A Muslim Alawi, and therefore he favored any of those who came in from the Alawite community. But then his government supported education and healthcare, and private universities just sprung up everywhere. But they were catering to the elite in the city. Sorry. So, in 2011, there was an estimated population of Syrians being about 11 million people. 22 million people, sorry, because that changed. But then there was a great divide between the urban people living in the urban areas and the rural areas. The people living in the urban areas were educated, were upper middle class and upper middle class, and those living in the rural communities, even though Syria was a breadbasket within the Arab world and was known as a breadbasket within the Arab world. And maybe those of you who had ever gone to Syria would have been so surprised at how green the country was and how abundant the food is. But they were neglected. The government neglected them. There weren't any services for them. And they had fewer and lower levels of education opportunities. And then, because being self-reliant, these communities, they were able to come together as communities and really organize. And then it didn't help that between 2003 and 2010, there was a drought in the country. It didn't really help matters much. And so a lot of the people in the countryside moved up to the cities, and that's where they started living. Prices went up, and people were so very dissatisfied. And then what happened, if I go back, and then what happened was that Arab Spring happened. So people started talking, people started thinking. Okay? But I'm just going too fast. The population of 22 million, the median age is 22 years old. And 60% of them lived in urban areas. The literacy rate is our same, as 90% male literacy and 77% female literacy. Currently, in 2013, UNHCR came out with a report that the school attendance has plummeted. Almost everyone has left and almost everyone has fled. Okay? And security isn't that great. So, the Syrians are made up of 90% Arabs. And the Kurds make up 10% of the population. That's about 2 million of them. And then you have other small communities, the Armenians, the Turkmens, the Don, the Greeks. But because of the recent turmoil that is happening within Syria, each of these groups has sort of come together and has sort of formed their own little ethnic groups and are fighting each other. Arabic in Syria is the main language, but we all have to keep in mind, please, that there are 22 Arab countries, and each of these 22 Arab countries speaks Arabic with a different dialect. I speak Arabic, but some of the words that I say in Arabic may be not understood by other Arabs. We're all joined together by the classical Arabic, which is written, but which is not spoken. Okay. So if you're going to be thinking of getting services to the Syrians, please make sure that you either have a Palestinian who's working with you, a Jordanian who's working with you, or another Syrian who's working with you, because that language is going to be the nearest to the Syrian dialect as can be. The Kurds speak, of course, Kurdish and Arabic, and keep in mind that the Kurdish language, there are two different dialects, and each dialect may not be understood by the other. Keep that in mind, please. And you have the Turkmens who speak Turkish. but which may not be understood in Turkey. Okay, so there are all these little nuances that we need to keep in mind when we're dealing with the Syrians who are going to be coming in. I didn't do anything wrong. So the Syrians, 74% of them are Sunni Muslims, 16 are Alawites, Druze and Ismailis. The Christians are 10% of the population, and they include the Greek Orthodox and the Catholics, and the Syriac Christians who are following the Assyrian teachings. The Aramaic-speaking Christians as well. So if you're going to be having someone in the office working with you, in your organization working with you, please make sure that they may speak Assyrian as well, because that will help. And if you can also have an Armenian speaking, we have them all in the center, an Armenian speaking there, a staff member, that will also help. You have also the Yazidi community, whose religion has been linked to Zoroastrianism, which is practiced within the Kurdish population. Syrians profess the faith that they were born into. They are not overly religious. They're not fundamentalists. Not that we know from they're not fundamental Muslims from what we know at the center. And they're very easygoing and a very, very nice population. Very easygoing population to deal with. The family structure. As is with every Middle Eastern country, family is very important. And the way that we think of family is not the way that the West thinks of family. I personally have 88 first cousins. That's family. And that's whom I would think of as family. A family is not just mother, father, and the children. No. So the Syrians have their family sort of responsibilities as well. Everyone takes care of everyone else. Everyone cares about everyone else. We at the center now are working with Lifeline Syria as a project, and we're seeing the Syrian Canadian community bringing us files and cases of family members who may be second cousin, third cousin, is defined by the West as family. Okay. And family reputation is very, very, very important to the Syrians. A family name is very, very important, as it is in the Muslim world, as it is in the Middle East. Okay? And so they're always afraid of the honor of the family. And this will have implications, and I'll come back and talk to it in just a little while. So the Syrian family is very patriarchal. The males, the head of the families, make all the decisions, most of them. Women are believed to be in need of protection, and so the males take care of everything. The gender roles. We're going to be seeing some families coming into Canada who are headed by single females. Okay, that is very unusual within the Syrian context, to have a female be a head of the family. It's very unusual, especially if she's coming in from a small village, so she will need a lot of support in taking care of herself, and her little children. She will need a lot of support, and she will need to be told that it's okay, that you can make this decision. You have to keep in mind that we in the Middle East, or coming in from Middle Eastern countries, we are coming in from a society that is a collective. We're not coming in from a society that is an individual. Individualism in the West is highly sought after. You're an individual, you make your own decisions, and then you stand by those decisions. In the Middle East, you think that you're making a decision, and then your parents will get involved, and then your grandparents will get involved, and then the head of the whole clan will get involved, and then you'll have my 88 cousins getting involved. And therefore, it's a collective decision. So there, in one way it is good, in that there's support. There's great support in that. And in another way, it is coming out to the West, you feel so very isolated. Oh my goodness, no one is going to make this decision with me. Should I put my daughter into a public school, or should I put all my savings and put her into a private school? Should I allow my daughter to go on horseback riding lessons, or can I put that money somewhere else? Those are all decisions that would have been taken by the collective and not necessarily by me. Okay, so coming over here, it is scary, especially for the single mothers who are coming in. The women in Syria, if they're educated, they will be working in every kind of profession. They'll be working, and it's expected of them to work. If they're in the middle class or upper middle class, they'll be expected to work. And they do work all over the place. But if they're coming in from the villages, they tend to stay home, take care of the household and take care of the family, and or be out in the field. And so, and or the low-income families may be sending, a younger aunt or a younger, not necessarily a child, but a younger aunt or a younger cousin to go into the other households to work if they're coming in from low-income families. So we're going to be talking about some of the challenges that some of the Syrian women and girls will be facing once they're coming here. Rape and sexual violence is not talked about within the Middle East. It is not, it's a taboo subject. But what's been happening to some of the Syrian girls and women in the camps and fleeing Syria is that many of them would have been raped and sexually molested. And that is not talked about. For us as service providers, we have to be very careful in approaching the subject, okay, and how we can deal with it. Very, very sensitive. Many of the women, should they have been raped or should they have been sexually assaulted, will not tell the male family members within their own house and get support from there, because it's a shameful thing. And it may bring shame to the whole family, so they would rather not do it. So we as service providers need to be very careful how we approach this, and when we're talking with the female, we need to make sure to ask her if it's okay if, for example, her husband is in the room, or if her son is in the room, or such a thing. Be very careful, please. What happened in the camps, or those Syrians fleeing with children, with daughters, between the ages of 12 and let's say 24, who may not have married, because Syrians tend to marry rather young, the parents may have married them off just to save them from sexual assaults and rapes. So you may be finding some Syrian families be coming into Canada as heads of families, and the single female may be 17 years old with 2 children. Okay. So, socializing within the Syrian context. Within the upper classes, it's fine to shake hands and or kiss on both cheeks. But usually, within the lower classes or the poorer classes, there may not be a handshake, but there may be a thumping of the heart just to say hello. We at the ACCT work a lot with sponsoring groups, and this is one of the things that they ask. A male within a sponsoring group would say, is it okay for me to put my hand out to the family that's coming in day after tomorrow, and I'm greeting her as she's getting off the plane, and we always say, you wait for her and see what she's going to do. If she extends her hand, then you shake it. If she doesn't, then that's also okay. But most of them will put their hand and thump their hearts, and this is a way of greeting as well. So as I said, Syrians tend to marry young, really young. You can find someone at the age of 14 being married off, especially in rural areas. And everyone lives at home. Everyone lives at home. Sometimes married children will also live at home, because homes back home are much larger than they are here. So everyone will have a little portion of the house to live in. If a girl does not marry, or if a boy doesn't marry, he still lives at home. So living away from home, or this notion that we have in Canada, oh my goodness, as Heather, my friend, my very good friend, used to tell me, your daughter is going to be 18 soon, aren't you glad that she's going to be leaving? We don't have that concept. We really don't. And it's okay. I asked Heather if I can talk about her, and then I told her I will. And so I did. And so that concept doesn't belong there. Children live at home, and they're always at home, and they're always welcome to be living at home. So for me to be living in Canada, even at this age, to be living in Canada as a single mother with a child who's almost 30, is considered, shameful. Doesn't your father have a room in his house to keep you? And so we all live at home. We don't live alone. Okay? And then most marriages, not all, but most marriages are arranged by the family members. But then because relationships between families are such that, you're in and out of each other's homes, you know each other, the mothers already know each other, the neighbors know everybody, so this neighbor will come to this neighbor and say, my son is getting ready to marry your daughter, is that okay? So there's the arrangement, it's already done. So that's the way it works. Most. And then this family of the groom and this family of the bridegroom are then one family. So imagine if I have 88 cousins on this side and he had 56 cousins on the other side. We're all one big family, and this is a family. We go to each other's weddings, we visit each other, we can drop into each other, and it's family, it's accepted. That's the way things happen in the Middle East. Parenting styles, and this is something that we'll all have to keep in mind when we're dealing with the Syrian community. And please keep in mind that this presentation was done in consultation with the Syrian community. And I'll talk a little bit later on about what the ACCT is doing with the Syrian community in Toronto. But usually, parenting is the job of the mother. She's the one who makes sure that things are going straight. The father is the one who may discipline, but the mother will always say, you wait until dad is home. And he may discipline. But parenting styles are quite different in Syria, in that they can be corporal punishment. A child can be hit. And these are some of the things that we will need to talk about to the new Syrians who are coming in regards to the laws in Canada and corporal punishment in Canada. Now, when we're talking about Syrians seeing medical doctors, usually female Syrians would like to be seen by a female doctor, usually. Especially if it's anything to do with gynecology, obstetrics, they would like to be seen by a female doctor, usually. One of the things that we as service providers need to do is ask them if it's okay, and give them the option. I know that in Toronto we have a wide range of midwives who are very, very, very active. So we can always give them the option as well, whether they'd like to be going with a midwife. Because some of them, especially those who are coming in from the countryside, might prefer to have a midwife. Okay, so we need to ask them. Okay. And when a Syrian goes in to see the doctor, the concept of confidentiality does not exist the way as it does here. When I go to see my family doctor, for example, and my daughter's with me, and my daughter's an adult, the family doctor will say, would you like for your daughter to be in the room? Or, Sarah, why don't you leave? I need to talk to your mother. Sometimes to Syrians and to many people who are not familiar with this practice, that is really scary. That means you're going to tell me bad news all by myself, and I'm not going to have the support around me. So that is really scary. So they expect for the whole family, not the 88 cousins, but for the whole family to come in with them as well when you're talking to them. And you need to make them understand that in Canada, privacy is highly rated, and this is what privacy means and confidentiality means. But having the family around is for emotional support. It's for great emotional support. And then the Syrians, all Syrians consider it their responsibility to take care of the elderly and or the ill. So some of them who may be coming to see us here and settle in Canada may still be worried about an aunt, second or third aunt who may be back home, who may not have been able to leave Canada. and may ask us, those of us who are working in the sector, and we've seen some of these newcomer Syrians who come in, ask us, how do I send money back home and make sure that it reaches my aunt in such and such a village? And they will worry about it, because they feel that it's their responsibility to take care of their family members. Don't ask them personal questions in regards to sex. It is a taboo subject, or if you need to ask them such questions, please ask it in a very sensitive manner, preferably with, sometimes they will ask you not to have an Arabic speaker present, because they may not want the other Arabic speaker client in the room. So we also need to be careful of these things. Okay? They're very sensitive issues. We have heard that not only were the females raped in Syria and coming out of Syria, but that the males have been raped as well, which is a terrible thing for any Syrian male, for any Middle Eastern man to have gone through a rape. So please, let's treat it very sensitively. Okay? And then mental health. There is no mental health in the Middle East. It doesn't exist. No one talks about mental health in the Middle East. It doesn't exist. Okay? No one wants to touch that subject. And as I was saying earlier to maybe some of you, that I worked for many years at the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, and so that's all we did. We dealt quite a lot with mental illness. And some of the Arabs who came in, and I used to do the interpretation for them, they used to tell me, please don't tell anyone else that I came in to see a psychiatrist. Please look, don't tell anyone else. And I'll say, well, we've all signed confidentiality clauses at the places that we work in. No, please don't tell anyone that I've been to see a psychiatrist. It'll bring shame to my family, bring shame to my name. So when we're dealing with Syrians, and I'm sure many of them have been traumatized, if not all of them have been traumatized, we have to be very careful how we approach the mental health component. And if you tell them that they will need to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or go in for trauma counseling, they may resist. They'll tell you there's nothing wrong with me. So we need to persevere. Syrians love their food. The Syrian food, for those of you who may have gone to Syria or who may have Syrian friends, is the best Mediterranean food within the Middle East. They love their food, and it is delicious. They love their food. They will invite you in for a meal, and it's not okay for you to say no, because they're really proud to be able to present it to you. They love their food. They make the most delicious food I've ever tasted, Mediterranean. And if they're inviting you to go out to dinner or to a cafe or something, they will insist on paying. And they will take it as an insult if you say, well, I'll pay for my portion. That doesn't happen. It's an insult. Usually the tab is picked up. Okay. They'll have tea or coffee in the morning, or pita bread, an assortment of cheeses, eggs, hummus, yogurt, jams, and olives. And lunch is usually a cooked stew. Now this is another thing that they're going to see as very different. In the West, we tend to have our main meal in the evening, because we work until 5 o'clock in the evening. We go home and eat at 6:30, 7. In the Middle East, the main meal is lunch. And then you have a very light meal, something somewhat very much like breakfast for dinner. So this is something that they may have to get used to, different foods. So the main meal is lunch. Chicken, meat, salads, vegetables. Usually they eat a lot of vegetables. Okay? And dinner is very, very simple. Very much like a breakfast. They dress modestly, the Syrians, modestly. And even those women who wear the hijab will wear the hijab in a sort of a different way than the other Middle Eastern women. When I was in Syria, the very first thing that caught that made me really surprised was that the Syrian woman will have a hijab on and then will have an overcoat. Just like any one of the overcoats here in dark brown or black or dark blue. And this is her way of wearing the overcoat just below the knees, and that was her hijab. Versus the long jalabiya or the jilbab or the niqab. I've never seen a Syrian with a niqab. But they dress modestly, depending where they come from. I know some Syrians who are my friends who are out there at the beach with us in bikinis and short skirts and just like any European person. But usually they're very, very, very modest in their way of clothing. The women in the cities will be dressed very much like the European styles, but the women in the rural areas will be covered all the way down in an overcoat with a hijab on. And then the older woman, regardless of whether she was a Muslim, she was a Christian, she was a Durzi or Ismaili, will always cover her head. This is just as a sign of growing older and a sign that we, the younger generation, not myself, but the younger generation, will show her some respect for her age. Not because of any belief, religious belief. Okay? Now the conflict, and what has the conflict done? It started in 2011, and it started by a group of high school boys. Because of the Arab Spring, what had happened is that they thought, well, now is our turn, and they took over and sprayed the word freedom on their school wall. And the police came, took them, and these students disappeared. They were tortured, there was news of them being tortured, and they disappeared and they were killed. And it started from there, in 2011. Protesters came along and they asked for democratic reforms, the lifting of the emergency law that's been there since the 70s, the release of the political prisoners, to have multi-party elections, and the end of the Assad regime. And it started from there. The government cracked down on them. Arrests, beatings, disappearances, torture. And people started mobilizing. Especially in the rural areas, people started mobilizing. So in June 2011, the Free Syrian Army was formed primarily by defectors from the Syrian army itself. They formed. And that's when we first started seeing relatively few refugees leaving the country. That's when some of the Syrians who had money decided that they're going to leave Syria and set up businesses in other Arab worlds and other Arab countries. But then in 2013, there were over 1,000 individual brigades. They were loosely organized, and within them you had some Islamic fighters, and they resisted the government forces. The Islamic extremists took advantage of the instability and joined in fighting both the Free Syrian Army and the regime. In 2013, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria was established, but established a base in eastern Syria, and in 2014 declared the Caliphate. We have to keep in mind that there are 7.6, those are the latest numbers that were given to us in July 2015, there are 7.6 million internally displaced persons in Syria, and half of them are children. Keep in mind that the general population, the median age of the population in Syria is 22. Keep that in mind, please. So we gathered this data from all these sources. 3 in every 4 people in Syria has been living in poverty has started living in poverty by the end of 2013. Syria was known as the one Arab country that took in refugees. And when they took in refugees, they treated them like Syrians. The refugees who came into Syria were the Iraqis, the Palestinians in 48, but the Iraqis came in 2003, the Lebanese came in 2006, And there are now 30,000 registered with UNHCR in Syria of these populations, the Iraqis and the Lebanese, who cannot go back. Many of them have started going back, but some of them chose not to go back and have registered within Syria. But the Syrians are known to be hospitable people. The only Arab country that took in refugees and allowed them free and treated them just like Syrians. Free medicals, free education. They were able to work legally and open their homes to them. And so some of the Syrians, Canadian Syrians, were talking to us at the office, were saying, we helped all these people. Why are our people now being treated so badly in Lebanon and in Jordan? So in the region, you've got 2.1 million in Turkey, you've got 1 million in Lebanon, you've got 633 in Jordan, you've got 244,000 in Iraq and 127,000 in Egypt, and all the surrounding areas of Syria at the moment. So talking about Jordan specifically, because this is where IRCC, I still have to get my head around the new acronym. So this is where our IRCC is going to be working, starting to work at the moment. So there are 633 Syrian refugees in Jordan at the moment. Okay, 84% of those are in the host country and are not in refugee camps, and they're going through some horrible circumstances. Horrible circumstances. And then the public sentiment, of course, in Jordan is that it's totally against the Syrians who are there. They're taking advantage of them. The rents are horrendous. And Jordan has recently come out, I haven't read the latest news, but then has recently come out and said that they've lost confidence in the international donor support for the Syrians. Lebanon hosts about 1.2 million Syrian refugees, representing 25% of the Lebanese population in that country. We go back, I'll just show you a picture of Lebanon. That little thing over there, that's Lebanon. There's Syria. And the Syrians are going through a very hard time as well. Lebanon has the world's highest number of refugees per inhabitant. In the 5 years, the humanitarian operations in Lebanon are transitioning from emergency to protracted crisis interventions. Okay? They are in a very delicate state, and as we heard, I think it was last week, is that the problem of getting these Syrian refugees out of Lebanon is that Lebanon has put in a condition on exit visas, and the Canadian government is now working with them, correct? Yeah. Is working with the Lebanese government in expediting those exit visas for them, whereas Jordan doesn't need an exit visa for the refugees. So, there's a study that has come out, the vulnerability assessment of Syrian refugees, that was conducted in Lebanon in 2013 and 14, and the World Bank, it was also done by the World Bank and by UNHCR and UNICEF, came in and primarily said that there's a decrease in food assistance in the World Food Organization's e-card reduction from $30 to $19 per person per month. So if you can imagine someone eating for $19 a month. Okay. Because the host countries, most of the host countries are prohibiting that the refugees work. They're not allowing them to work, not giving them work permits, are prohibiting them from working. But many of them are working, and as we call it over here, they're working under the table, and therefore they're being taken advantage of. There are some young children, Syrian children, on the streets of Lebanon selling flowers and or shoe shines and or selling what is called mystica in the Arabic language, which is gum. And they're selling it on the streets and to cars. And children cannot go to school because schools are prohibitively expensive, and so the kids are out on the streets selling all these things to bring home money for the family. And so support from the humanitarian organizations is lacking and is often perceived to be biased, and this is written by them. Okay, and the host countries are beginning to be really aggressive towards the refugees there. There's high rent and they're being exploited. So the refugees, what is all this doing to them? They're taking on debt and inability to repay. Last year, I think there was some programming on the BBC they had some phenomenal documentaries whereby they were showing some Syrians in Lebanon, this was in Lebanon, selling body parts so that they can get some money for rent and or get some money to enable the rest of their families to come out and join them in Lebanon. But they were selling corneas and they were selling kidneys. And the refugees are going to be coming to us with psychological and emotional pressures and health deteriorations, diseases and illnesses, domestic violence, and they have not enrolled or have withdrawn their children from school, so the school systems here will need, the school boards here will need to be ready for maybe children not having been in school for 4 or 5 years. Over there, the refugees do not have access to food, okay, and are being employed illegally. Okay, understanding the cultural differences. Within the Middle East, it's very, very, very normal for the same sex to be walking down the streets holding hands or with their hands on each other's shoulders. We need to make the Syrians understand that here in Canada it may have a different meaning. Okay, so we need to make them understand the customs and laws governing acceptable behavior and speech between genders. We need to let them understand that for those who may have domestic violence issues within their homes, even when they're here, there are laws to protect them. We need to let them know that. And we also need to let them know and reiterate it again and again that anything they tell us is in confidence, even if it's being told to them by an Arabic-speaking counselor. It is in confidence, and if the counselor breaks that confidence, and that counselor will be fired. We need to let them know that because they will not believe it. Okay. Healthcare. So, in Damascus in 2009, there was 1 doctor per 339 people. Okay. Where in the rural areas, the ratio was 1 doctor per almost 2,000 people. And in 2011, there were only 2 public psychiatric hospitals and 70 psychiatrists serving a population of 22 million people. Wow. So psychiatry is not really looked upon as really being a medical need. In 2013, half of the country's healthcare facilities had been destroyed and damaged. And therefore, people who are living in Syria at the moment don't have access to health care. We have a cousin of one of our settlement workers who's still in Syria, and she's a medical doctor. She had her family smuggled out. She's got 2 young children. Had the family smuggled out. Her husband had already been abroad studying, doing his PhD in Austria when all this started, and he stayed put. She sent her 2 young children to Egypt with her parents, and she stayed put because she said that she has 7 brothers, and they're all in Syria, not one of them has moved. And should she decide that she leaves Syria, then her brothers will be killed. So she is in Syria, and she's running this little clinic, and she's a gynecologist to serve the women. And she said that the government came in and told her this is her clinic She built it, she did the whole thing. They told her that they will need half of the clinic. They'll need it to be closed off because the government needed the other half, and she said, I let them have it. And then they told her that she needed to build a barrier because the men are going to be accessing the government side of the building. And so she needed to build a wall barrier so that they don't see all the women coming in to see her. And so she had to shell out and she built it. And she said, this was just last week, she was given notice that next month, in the new year, they want her out of there. And so she asked them, I'm assisting all these women. What do I do? Where do I go? No, that's none of our business. You're to leave this, and you're to leave all of your equipment. The 1st of January, you're not to come here any longer. So she was texting with our staff member, and she said, well, if I leave now, they're going to view it as desertion, and they're going to take it out on my 7 brothers. She's the only girl. And so she's stuck. So we talked about schools and the resources and the damaged buildings, and school attendance is less than 7% in some areas. What we have done, and I've put a list of some of the Syrian groups here in BC. There's up on the screen. I'll talk a little bit about what we've done at the Arab Community Center. We became a partner with Lifeline Syria in January of this year and started working with Lifeline Syria, which is a sponsoring group made up of committed members within the community in bringing in some Syrian refugees, working through the SARS and bringing in some Syrian refugees. And it was launched by the mayor and by Kathleen Wynne, our premier, in June of 2015. And now we have a staff member who works with the Syrian Canadian community. Their input into what it is that we do, their commitment, their volunteerism in our organization is invaluable. I will really encourage you all to get in touch with the Syrian communities that are within your own communities, and that's why I bought and I put their names out there for you. You will find them and their work invaluable. You'll find their input invaluable. They will give you some very good insights into the Syrian communities that are here. They're working with us in working with the sponsoring groups that are not only sponsoring Syrians, but are also sponsoring other refugees or other groups as per the community that has come to us and said, why only the Syrians? Syria is one of 22 countries. Why only Syrians? What happened to the Yemenis? What happened to the Eritreans who've been in the Sudan for 3 generations? What happened to the Somalis in the Dadaab camp who've been there for 3 generations? So we're working with other sponsoring groups as well to assist these other communities. We are so very happy to be working in the settlement field at this time. It's invigorating with the new government. It's more invigorating. We are working together, I think, for the very first time, working together as we've never worked together in the settlement field. That's on the one hand. And I'm hoping and I'm really wishing for this to be some sort of a model. We can come out with some sort of a model that we can help other refugees, not only the Syrians, and show to the government that we can rise to the challenge of bringing in other refugees working with the communities. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, it pleases me no end that and I don't know about BC, but that the community, the regular Canadian community in Toronto, all of a sudden realizes, oh my goodness, there's something called the settlement agency that can help us. Oh, you mean you can find housing, you can help me with housing, and you do this all free? And this is what is happening. So we're working closely with the community, with the Canadian community, as I tend to call it. And we're going out there, we're talking to sponsoring groups, we're giving them a highlight of the Syrians, we're meeting with them. This morning we had a staff member who was at the airport with some of the sponsoring groups because they had the refugee coming in. We are attaching a staff member to each sponsoring group that comes in to us, seeks our assistance, so that she can be the point of contact, or he can be the point of contact for these sponsoring groups, and that is working phenomenally well. We have had so many people come out from the community saying that they would like to be able to donate things. So we have partnered with 2 organizations, the Muslim Welfare Center and another sister organization, and another organization within the sector called Cultural Link, where we've set up warehouses across from the east to the west in Toronto to collect donations. We have set up and trained over 120 volunteers to assist with presentations, because we can't keep up. And those are Syrians who present them, because the sponsoring groups want to see a real life Syrian, and not someone's figment of imagination. And so they go out and they do the presentations and they answer the questions. And the volunteers are helping with the donations. The volunteers are helping with the sponsoring groups, because we've already seen about 7 families come in. The volunteers are helping with not only the interpretation, but there's been some translation that was needed. The volunteers are going with them to the various offices, are teaching them something that someone had taught me when I first came to Canada, called the transit, the piece of paper that you get when you get on the transit that will enable you to go from another transfer. Thank you. See, I forget it because it costs me a lot of money, so I tend to sort of block it out. But we have volunteers who are doing that. We also have volunteers who are in the office answering the telephones. They've all been trained. We have some money that has come to us as staff members from the city, and the province has promised us some staffing as well. And I'm going to be pushing CIC for some extra staffing, because we can't keep up. We really cannot keep up. But what I'm trying to tell you all is that one of the best ways for you to be able to assist the Syrian refugees coming in is to work with the existing Syrian community that is in your midst. They will give you invaluable information, as they have to us. Thank you.